Neil 係好愛國嘅一位咧香港外國作家我次次想同佢講英文咧，都俾佢用中文鬧翻轉頭，鬧到我冇晒自尊心唯有咧 ，but I think there are a couple of global citizens here, so let's try our best to mix the three politically controversial languages all together to make this seminar into a nice cultural cocktail, as your books in the past have successfully manifested. Right? So I hope a couple of non-Chinese global citizens here will be able to catch the meaning as much as possible if there will be occasional embarrassing interruption in a foreign language you might not understand all. So thank you for your tolerance, and just wait with patience until the channel is switched back to English, hopefully. Okay?
Anyway, I just want to tell everyone we have books in Chinese and English for this book, and also my two previous books with joint publishing. So if you want, you can buy them outside, or you can buy them at the joint publishing stand on the first floor. So I want to thank you all very much for coming today. There are many wonderful things to see at the book fair. There are many other excellent events, so I really appreciate your taking the time to come. I also want to thank the Hong Kong Trade Development Council for organizing it very well. And thanks to them, we have done 4 media interviews this week. And I especially want to thank my friend, Mr. Tsao, for coming today, because he is very famous in Hong Kong, and I am not famous. So as soon as his name appeared on the advertisement, many people rushed to sign in. Otherwise, I think it would just be my wife, her parents would be here. So anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Tsao. So let's get started. I'm sure in this room, almost everyone has been to one or both of the palace museums. Please put up your hand. Who's been to Beijing Museum?
邊個去過故宮或者台北博物院嘅？
And who's been to the Taiwan Museum?
Wow.
That's right. So that's very good. So you already have a very good idea of the background. So I think you all know who is this gentleman. Who is he?
邊個？哦，溥儀 yes.
And where did Puyi live? Now, what happened in 1911? 1911年, what happened in 1911? Right. But China is much more civilized than Britain or France or Russia, because after their revolutions, what happened? Yes, because in Britain, in Russia, and in France, after revolution, they cut off the head of the king, because they were afraid if they didn't cut off the head of the king, he would remain and he would find a way to come back. So they cut off his head and they took over his palaces. But in China, you are much more Wenming, you are much more civilized. So after the Xinhai Revolution, the new government made agreement with Mr. Puyi and the Empress Dowager and the imperial family, and allowed them to stay in the palace, not the whole of it, but a part of it, and they gave them a very generous allowance. Not as much as they earned before, but still by contemporary standards, a very generous allowance. So that's really how our story begins. So the Zhonghua Minguo, the Republic of China, is set up in 1911, but the old emperor is still alive, and he's living in his palace with his wife and his concubines and his eunuchs, and they are having this very, very wealthy life that they had before. But after a while, they find that this money from the government is not enough. So what is another way to earn some money if you're a penniless emperor? Well, not penniless, but not enough money emperor. What do you do? What assets do you have which you can change into money? You're living in the palace, right? What's inside the palace? Yes. You are living in this palace which has been for several centuries the imperial palace of the ruling family of China. And in this palace you have dozens of priceless treasures in this palace. So this is what started to happen. The emperor, his brother, the eunuchs, the people working in the palace, they start to remove the pieces from the palace. And of course it's very easy because many of them are very small. You can put them in your pocket, you can put them in a bag, and they take them out. And as you know, in Beijing, there are many antique shops where you can buy. You know, Li Chang. I'm sure some of you have been there to buy antiques. Well, this also existed at this time. So the pieces were were being removed and sold to these shops, and there they were easily bought by Chinese or foreign buyers. So the people outside the palace, the people in the Beijing government and intellectuals, they saw what was going on. And they feared if we don't do something, a majority of these treasures will be removed. And we will have no more this cultural palace, this cultural treasure house. And many of the young men in the government then, they had been abroad to study in Japan, in Europe, and they'd seen what had been done to the former palaces in these countries. Now, can you give me an example? For example, in France, what's the biggest museum in France? And what was the Louvre before? Yeah, it was a palace of the French royal family before revolution. Now, how about in Russia? What's the most famous museum in Russia? In St. Petersburg? Yes, and what was the Hermitage before? It was the royal palace of the Tsar. So, these young people had seen what had been done in these countries, and they thought this is what they should do to the Palace Museum. They should turn it, so I should say into the Royal Palace, so turn it into a Palace Museum. So this is what happened in November 1924, and the government made the decision to get rid of Puyi and all his courtiers and eunuchs and turn the palace into a museum. That is how our book starts. Okay? So this is a photograph of that day, November the 6th, 1924, and the police are trying to move the people from inside the palace and get them to leave, but they don't want to leave. So they're trying not to be too violent. So can you guess who these people are who are being moved? I mean, who lived with the emperor? Only in China you had such people. Yes, so these are the eunuchs. They don't want to, well, nobody wants to leave. So there they are resisting, trying not to leave, okay? So they finally clear out the emperor and all the courtiers, and they want to open the museum as soon as possible. But before you can open the museum, of course, you have to know what you have inside. And they'd never done an inventory before. So the government invite all these scholars. Beijing is full of scholars, you know. Many scholars came, and they asked them to be voluntary workers and to make an inventory of all the items. And the figure is beyond belief. It was 1.17 million items. Now, these are not all artworks. They would also be documents. But altogether, there's 1.17 million items. And they want to make inventory as soon as possible, and then they can open the museum. And they want to open the museum very quickly. Because remember, the emperor is not executed. He's still alive. He's still living in Beijing. There are many people in the government who would like the emperor to come back. The government of China is not at all stable at that time. So they want the inventory to be done as soon as possible, and then we can open the museum. And they want to prevent anything being stolen. So they have very strict rules. So you can read in the records that when they opened a room to do the inventory in that room, you can never have one person going by himself. There must be at least two, usually three, and they must make a record of who enters the room, how long they stay in the room, what items they look at, and then when they leave the room, they seal the door and they make a record. So this procedure is still followed today in Beijing and Taipei because they are afraid of individuals stealing the items. So, as I say, there was a great sense of urgency. We must do this quickly before Puyi finds a way to come back to the throne or some warlord supports him. So this is a photograph of the Palace Museum in October 1925. And it was opened on the 10th of October, which is October the 10th. 双十节. It's the 14th anniversary of the Republic of China. Now, this is a man called Mr. Wu Ying. And this is his son called Mr. Wu Zuguang and his beautiful wife when they are married and then in the 1980s. And I want to show you these two photos because this is how I was introduced to the story. Because in the 1980s we met Mr. Wu, who was a very distinguished playwright and quite a brave man because he was willing to speak to the foreign devils. We could go and sit and have a tea with him and discuss lots of topics. And it was he who told me that his father, Mr. Wu Ying, had joined the palace in 1924 and worked there for nearly 10 years. And he gave me the outline of the book. So it was on that day when I listened to him that I had the idea that we must make a book about this very dramatic topic. So there is his father, Mr. Wu Ying. And he said his father was never so happy as he was when he was in the Palace Museum working, because he just lived for Chinese culture, Chinese treasures. And Mr. Wu Ying had 15 children, but no ernai or sanai. And he didn't drink and he didn't gamble. So for a Chinese man, I think that's quite a good record, yes?
Yes. This tantamount to Jesus Christ.
So, okay, so there's Mr. Wu Zuguang. So the museum opens on 1925 on October the 10th. But the situation in Beijing is not at all stable. As you know, the central government in China was not strong at that time. It was mainly based in the south. They had limited control over Beijing. There were many powerful warlords in the north, and there were different governments in Beijing. And one of them proposed that Puyi come back. This is the problem. If you don't execute the emperor, it's better to execute him, then he can't come back. And then 1928, we have a man called Mr. Jing Xiayi. Now, he was not a peasant, not a Tubaozi. He was highly educated, and he was a member of the Central Standing Committee of the Kuomintang, so a very important person. And his proposal was that this museum was a piece of the past, feudal past. And now China was a republic. It was no longer an imperial system. So to complete the transition to the republic, we must get rid of this museum and auction the pieces and use the money to make a new central museum in Nanjing. That was his proposal. So this was debated very fiercely for about 2 months, and finally the government decided not to do this. So during this period, the Palace Museum was quite precarious. The income was not sufficient. They just survived on the entry tickets, the books, and the magazines and donations. So this is to give you a flavor of the time. These are the workers who lived and worked in the palace at that time. And I think they are very remarkable individuals. Their pay would be extremely low, as you know, Beijing is very cold in the winter. And because the palace is made of wood, they are not allowed to have fire. So you cannot have coal or wood burning in the winter. So in the winter, you just have to wear enormous amounts of clothing. So they had a great spirit of patriotism toward the arts, these workers. So what happens now? Who is this? He's not Chinese. He looks like Chinese, but he's not. Who's this?
Japanese emperor.
Yeah. This is Mr. Hirohito. He's Japanese emperor. So Japan has by now conquered Manchuria, and the Guangdong army crosses the border into Hebei province and starts to approach Beijing. So the central government decide that they cannot defend Beijing because the Japanese army is too well equipped. It has all kinds of aircraft and artillery which the Chinese military does not possess. So they decide that to save the pieces from being taken away by the Japanese, they must move them. And this is a very momentous decision because for centuries the items have never left the palace, let alone left Beijing. But they decide that this is necessary. So it happens on February the 5th, 1933. And we just come back to Mr. Wu Ying here, because when they decided to move the pieces, nobody in the museum would agree to be responsible, because it's too grave a matter. Imagine you move the pieces and something goes wrong, the train is derailed, there's a fire, there's an accident, they are stolen, anything happens, you are responsible. You are guilty before history. So Mr. Wu Ying was asked to do it, and he refused. He said it's too grave a responsibility. So finally, the museum director came back to him and pleaded with him and begged him to do it and said this was the nation required him to do this. So finally he agreed. He wasn't happy to do it, but he agreed to be responsible. So they leave Beijing station. It's the middle of the night. There are soldiers with machine guns on every single carriage. There are soldiers with machine guns on the top. And in the Suzhou district, the word has already got out that the pieces are going to be moved. So this large group of bandits think this is going to be the robbery of the century. It's the first time ever you have the chance to steal the palace museum treasures. So they are lying in wait for the train. So that period when they went through Suzhou was extremely tense. But fortunately, there was such armaments on the train that the bandits decided not to attack. I mean, they were quite well armed too, but not as well armed as the soldiers on the train. So the train arrives in Nanjing. But when it arrives in Nanjing, Mr. Wu Ying learns that the central government has not decided where they should go. Should they stay in Nanjing or go somewhere else? So for 2 weeks, the pieces sit in this railway yards in Nanjing while the government decides what to do. And he's sweating every minute because, of course, in a railway station, they are even more vulnerable to fire, theft, accident. So finally, the central government decides they should go to Shanghai. Sorry, this is just a photo of them just before they were moved. So this is where they were taken. So this is the Roman Catholic Cathedral in Shanghai, and it had very good vaults underneath. So they were the place chosen to keep the pieces, okay? But of course, this is not Chinese territory. This is an international settlement. This is French settlement, actually. So although the pieces were safe in there, the Chinese government did not have free access to them. So they decided they must build in Nanjing a dedicated warehouse for the pieces. So they stayed in this place for a short time, and then they moved to Nanjing. So this is the main entrance of this new storehouse in Nanjing. So this was a very modern, air-conditioned, highly secure warehouse that they built in Nanjing for the pieces, and they moved them in there. Sorry, this is not the storehouse. This is just one of the new buildings that was built in Nanjing by the new government that was set up there in 1927. So what's this?
The occupation of Shanghai.
That's right. So
After
not
the,
content with Manchuria,
August 1937.
the Japanese army starts an all-out war on China. So this is the campaign in Shanghai, which is one of the biggest battles in World War II. And the casualty figures are unbelievable. And the Chinese resistance is very heroic. But as you all know, the Japanese had better equipment, better aircraft, and they eventually won. So the Japanese army is moving from Shanghai, and it's approaching to Nanjing. It's not very far distance. So the management of the museum decide, again, we have to move the pieces. But this time it's very rushed, emergency. They haven't made a proper preparation because the Japanese army is going to arrive at any minute. So you can read in the book this very extraordinary period when they're rushing against time to put the pieces into the crates and find a way to get them out before the Japanese arrive. So by ship or by train or by road. So here's a map of the three main routes that they took. So one is to Hankou, Changsha, one is to Suzhou and to Xi'an, and the other one is to Hankou and then to Chongqing. Now remember, this is a period of all-out war between China and Japan, and everyone is escaping. So it's not just the crates that are moving, but millions of people are moving, factories are moving, the army is moving, the civil service is moving. So the crates have to fight with everyone else for space on trains and boats and lorries. And this is where the role of the central government was very important, because they give a lot of priority to the crates. They regard it as a matter of national urgency. So to give you an example, you see in Changsha, the pieces were stored in Changsha for a short period, and then the government got intelligence that the next day there would be a Japanese air raid on Changsha. So that night they sent trucks, and the trucks went to Changsha, and the crates were loaded into the trucks, and they were driven away at about 4 in the morning. And at about 5:30, the Japanese planes arrive and they bomb Changsha. So there was a lot of damage, many people were killed, buildings were destroyed, but the pieces escaped without being damaged. So this is really an extraordinary story if you look at this map and consider that China's communications then were very backward. There were only railways in the east and north of the country. So the southwest region, where they all went, there were no railways, there were few proper roads, and the pieces had to be taken on these routes to get them out of the range of the Japanese bombers. So here's some images of the move. So I think this is a very good image. I mean, it shows the quality of the road, a very narrow road, and there the staff are having to push the trucks to keep them moving. And this is a very romantic photo of the staff of the museum in one of these mountainous regions of the southwest, en route. So they took a photograph of themselves. And that's a very good image too, of it being taken across the river. And this is one of the places where the pieces were stored. So they are the staff of the museum there. Now, where were they kept? They were kept wherever they could find a place. So this would be a temple, or cave, or private house, anywhere where it was out of danger and was reasonably secure, and they have to try to find a way to prevent the humidity and the insects from attacking them. Now this is Emeishan in Sichuan. So this is where they were stored there. And we must speak about the work of the staff, because it's because of them really that the pieces were preserved. They went with the pieces all the time, and they stayed with them all the time. And in this place they slept inside this building in order to be close to them, as if they were members of their own family. So now we're in 1945, and where are we here?
We won the war, supposedly.
Very good, yes. This is in Chongqing.
Thank you.
The war is over, everyone is rejoicing, okay? So the war ends, but all the pieces that were in Nanjing and Beijing that were not moved, they were not taken away by the Japanese. And for me, this is one of the biggest surprises to do this story, because I'm from Europe. And the Nazis who conquered Europe, they are liumang, they are hooligans. So when they conquered a country, they looted it of its art pieces and took them to Germany. So I assumed Japan would do the same, but this is not the case. They didn't. So it's quite ironic to say that this whole move was actually not necessary, because Japan did not take the items. So I asked the lady, Madame Feng, who was director of the Taipei Museum, I said, why didn't they take them? And she said, because they believed Beijing and Nanjing belonged to the Japanese Empire, and so there was no reason to take them. And she then said, but it's different to you, Guilo, because when you sacked the Summer Palace in 1860, your soldiers, they took everything, because they were like in a foreign country, so they took the pieces and took them home. But the Japanese thought, you are now part of Japanese Empire, so no need to take them away. So after the war was over, the question is, where do the pieces go back? Do they go back to Beijing or go back to Nanjing? But because it took so long to move everything out of Chongqing, they didn't reach Chongqing until the end of 1947. So by now, the Civil War is fully in swing. So who are the people in this photograph? And who's the gentleman on the left with the bow tie? And the very good. And the gentleman on the left, who is he? Yeah, very good. So his job is to try to make a coalition government, KMT, CCP government, but he failed. So Chiang Kai-shek loses the war, and he decides to go to Taiwan, and he decides to take with him, he can't take all the pieces, but a portion of the pieces. So why do you think he wants to take the pieces with him to Taiwan? Yes? Treasures, yeah. Because he believed he's the president of China. The communist bandits, he called Gongfei, they are illegitimate government, and I'm going to recover the mainland, Guangfu Dalu. So he is just taking the pieces for a short time to Taiwan, and the pieces show that he is the true emperor, because he took with him the seal of the great Qing emperor. He took that with him, and that is a sign that he was the most important person in China. So you can see he took 46,000 art pieces, and he took silver, dollars, and foreign exchange. Now this gentleman was called Mr. Ma Heng. Now Mr. Ma Heng, he was the director of the Beijing Palace Museum. Now Mr. Mao Hong did not like Chiang Kai-shek. He did not like the Kuomintang government. So he refused to go to Taiwan, and he also refused to move any items still in Beijing to Taiwan. And Chiang Kai-shek was very angry with him, but he couldn't do anything. And this man, I'm sure you know him. For sure. Now, what did he do? Did he go to Taiwan? Yes, he went to Taiwan. So Chiang Kai-shek sent 2 planes to Beijing just at the end of the Civil War. And his aim was to get all the intellectual elite of Beijing to come with him to Taiwan. So he took some, not very many, but Hu Shi was one who did go with him. But he couldn't take any of the pieces from Beijing because of Mr. Ma Hong. Now, I'm sorry, this isn't the ship that took the pieces to Taiwan. This is a big troop ship. But I want to show you this photo because to give you the idea of the intensity of the emergency of that moment. Everyone is trying to escape to Taiwan. Soldiers want to escape, civil servants want to escape, their families want to escape, but there are not enough ships and not enough planes. So only 3 ships were available to take the pieces to Taiwan. So they took a lot. They wanted to take more, but they could only take a limited amount. So when they arrive in Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek, of course, doesn't plan to stay there. This is just a temporary place. So he just puts them in this storehouse in the center of Taiwan, a rather remote place, just for safekeeping. And this is a photograph of the staff of the Taipei, I shouldn't say Taipei, the Taiwan officials, and behind them is where they were stored, because he was expecting the Communist Air Force to attack. So the pieces had to be stored in this place so they would not be damaged by bombing. So let's go back to Beijing, and everybody knows who this is. So do you know where this place is? Can you guess? No, it's not this. It's the wall of the Palace Museum. Now, you know, Chairman Mao was very superstitious, and he went to see a fortune teller. And the fortune teller gave him many good pieces of advice, and one of them was, you cannot enter the Palace Museum, because if you do, you will make all the previous emperors, whose spirits are still living there, of course, you will make them angry. What are you doing, this new emperor? You know, I'm the emperor. So they said, you must not enter the Palace Museum. So what Chairman Mao did was he went to this place 3 times because he wanted to be close to it, but he didn't dare to enter because he feared he would disturb the spirits of the previous emperors. And of course, the fortune teller was quite correct because Mao lived to a great old age. He didn't disturb the spirits of the old emperors. So this is the closest that he came. But the other communist leaders, they didn't have this worry. So Zhou Enlai, He Long, Peng Dehuai, the other leaders, they often entered the museum and they took in foreign guests, but Chairman Mao never entered. So what have we got here? What's going on here?
Cultural Revolution.
Yes. So this was the most dangerous moment for the Palace Museum, much more dangerous than the occupation by the Japanese. The Japanese occupied Beijing for 8 years, and they took almost nothing. They took a few pieces, copper pieces, which they wanted to make into weapons, but otherwise they didn't take anything. But this moment is the most dangerous. It was the 18th of August 1966. We have 100,000 Red Guards. And on the platform up there, Chairman Mao and Lin Biao give these speeches. And the slogan is to destroy the 4 olds. 破四旧. Destroy the old culture. destroy the old traditions, destroy the old thinking. And can you imagine, this is just in the front of the Palace Museum. They're telling 100,000 people, you must destroy the past. So, what's the obvious thing that you destroy? Of course, it's the Palace Museum. So, that night, the people in the museum thought, this is it. Tomorrow, the Red Guards will come and destroy everything. But that night, the official version, it was Zhou Enlai ordered the gates to be closed. I mean, you can never be quite sure with mainland history actually who decided, I don't know, but that's the official version. Anyway, the gates were shut. So the next morning, the Red Guards tried to enter, but they were not able to enter. But for them, it's no problem, because Beijing is full of art treasures. They went to loot other ones, but they didn't loot the ones in there. So for the next 5 years, the museum was closed, and the staff were sent off to the countryside to study Mao's works and do rural labor and, you know, look after pigs and so forth. But the museum was not damaged. So who's this? Very good. So you read in my book an account by one of the museum staff, and she said that they are in the museum, they cannot do any research, they have to read the works of Mao, and they can't do anything. And one day they were told there's going to be a very important visitor, and we are opening the museum again. And this was the visitor, Mr. Kissinger. So he was the reason why they opened the museum again. So after meeting Chairman Mao, he went into the museum, and it reopened in 1971. So I want to show just one or two items from the Palace Museum. This is one of the emperors. Have a guess.
No.
Rongzheng Huangdi. Many beautiful vases there. So this is one of them. And this is the National Palace Museum of Taipei. And this was only built because President Chiang Kai-shek realized he could not recover the mainland, and he would have to stay in Taiwan. So he should build a proper museum for the items, and it was also be a very big tourist attraction. So this is what he built. It opened in 1965. And half of the money came from United States. And this is in front of a mountain. So 97% of the items are inside the mountain. And again, the president was afraid the PLA will bomb Taipei. So by putting the items in the mountain, even the PLA bomb, the items will be safe from the bombing. So this is probably the most famous items in the Taipei Museum. What do we call them?
They call it on the left the Da Bai Cai.
Bai Cai, yeah. When I went there last time, I was waiting at the main door, and there was a group of mainlanders coming, and I said, "What do you want to see?"
Bai Cai.
Bai Cai, you can Bai Cai. So there's the Bai Cai.
Pork and the pork on the right side.
And this is from the, I think from the Shang, is it possible the Shang dynasty? I'm not sure. Anyway, it's a very old picture. Anyway, this is also in Taipei. This is also in Taipei. So who's this? That's right. So now, well, after 1971, I should say, the Palace Museum has become the most important venue in China to show foreign visitors. So there are many, many pictures of presidents and prime ministers and VIPs visiting. So this is one of them. And this is a very historic photo. The left is the head of the Beijing Museum. On the right side is the then head of the Taipei Museum. And she's one of the ladies I interviewed. And this is the first meeting since 1949. So this meeting was about 10 years ago. Okay? And the lady on the right, I must say, is a really remarkable lady. And when I interviewed her, I was quite captivated. And she told me this story that I described in the book, and that was another reason to write it, because she described it so well. I'll be surprised if you can tell me what this is. Anybody know? Yeah, this is the new National Palace Museum of Taiwan. This opened in Chiayi on December 28th last year. And President Mao was there, most of the cabinet was there. And we went there the day before. We did a presentation for the book in a nearby city. And we also attended. And so I sat at the back with a pile of books. And while the president was speaking, I tried to do some sales to the people at the back. And the Taiwanese are very polite, you know, so they were very pleasant and took out the Taibi, you know, and bought the book and shut me up. So the president could go on speaking. But this is different from the one in Taipei because it's not of the treasures from mainland. It's called an Asian Cultural Museum. So most of the items are from Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, India. And the idea is to have two different museums. So you go to Taipei to see the treasures from the mainland, and then you go to Chiayi in the south and you see the treasures from other countries in Asia. That's the idea of this museum. And as you can see, the architecture is completely the opposite. This is a very modernist design, whereas the one in Taipei is very classical. So anyway, that's much too much talk from me. So now please, let's have some questions.
Thank you for plotting such a marvelous graph of the exodus or odyssey of such a huge volume of mankind's treasure in the past 70 years. One question from me. During such journey, if I were one of those so-called scholars accompanying cargoes and cartels of such treasures through the wilderness and mountains and rivers, I would certainly look around, seeing there was no police or PLA or ICIC officials. I would have been too tempted just to grab one or two and squeeze them into my own pocket, right? Because I'm human, right? I'm too human, and I can resist anything except temptation. Did that ever happen?
Well, the official answer to that is it did not happen. Now, I agree with you. I cannot believe it didn't happen. But you ask the officials from Beijing side or from the Taiwan side, they say it didn't happen. And the staff were so loyal to the pieces, it became their mission, their destiny, that they didn't take it. But can I answer this with a story? When I had just arrived in Hong Kong about a year, I knew this very fat and ugly British sergeant in the Hong Kong police, and he invited me to his apartment, which in those days, as you know, the British policemen got very large apartments, and he introduced me to his wife. And she was tall and elegant, and she was so beautiful, and he was so short and ugly and rather uncouth. And I thought, how could this possibly happen? So I asked the lady, well, you couldn't say, why did you marry this man? But you can say, how do you come to be in Hong Kong? And this was her story. My father was in the Central Bank of China. Chiang Kai-shek gave him the job to move the gold from Nanjing to Taiwan, and that's what he did. And Chip, it's the same story. He was so honest, he didn't touch one single bar. I mean, in the course of this journey, he could have taken enough money to secure his lifetime and his children's lifetime. But his daughter said, no, he didn't take anything. So as a result, our family was penniless. So then there was no need for her to say why she married this gentleman, but that was the answer. So such people did exist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in general, we Chinese used to be a very honest people.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions from you? Yes.
You mentioned right from the start that infantry they made of how many millions items. Can you give us a rough idea now the proportion of the infantry kept in the two museums?
Well, the portion in Taiwan is of course very small because they only moved a portion out of Beijing to the south, and then President Jiang could only take a portion of that to Taiwan. So Beijing, and also there is some still in the Nanjing Museum, they account for the large proportion. But the Taiwan officials will tell you that they selected the best items. Now, I cannot tell you it is true or not, but they said, of course, we want to take the best items with us.
The Taipei Palace collects more than 600,000 items, 60幾萬件, among which I believe the story that they keep the best because they still keep the original calligraphy of Su Dongbo, you know, the calligraphy of more than 1,000 years ago. Chek Bikfu, Su Dongbo is with them, apart from this Da Bai Cai, right? So many, Wang Heiji咩你喺嗰度. Well, you may ask your questions in Cantonese or Mandarin if you feel a bit shy with speaking English.
Mr. O'Neill, there are huge public demand of treasures exchange between Beijing Palace Museum and Taipei Palace Museum. If my memory serves, there was one exchange of such exhibition before. Now, the main problem is that the Palace Museum in Taiwan, they say, okay, we have huge treasures in our side. But if you want us to loan some of our treasures, especially Bai Cai, the cabbage, and the pot, to Beijing Museum, well, we are very worried about that because we cannot guarantee you, once you take it, you return it back to us. Because there will be no guaranteed definition or no guarantee letter of agreement. Once we loan those treasure items you in Beijing, you return back to us. But on the contrary, if we loan those items from Beijing, from your side, we, people in Taiwan, definitely return to you. Do you think is there any future prospect of the two Palace Museum exchange items peacefully? Thank you.
Well, you already answered your own question. Of course, I put this to the head of the Taipei Museum. They said that when they go to Germany or to America or to France or anywhere and they loan out pieces, there's this standard agreement which everybody signs, under which the other museum undertakes to safeguard all the pieces on the route and to guarantee that they will come back to Taiwan. And also, if there's any legal challenge in that country, they will not follow it. Because maybe somebody will say, my grandfather owned the pieces, they were seized from him and then taken to the museum, that piece belongs to me. So the museum must guarantee this legal attack will not succeed. But they said the mainland will not sign this agreement. And secondly, the official name is Guoli Gugong Boyuan, the National Palace Museum. Now the mainland will not recognize this word, Guoli, national, because of course mainland doesn't admit that Taiwan is a guojia. So if you cannot even admit the name of the partner, how can you sign an agreement? So I think in the near future, it's impossible that items will go from Taiwan to mainland. But on the other hand, the mainland has lent quite a few pieces to Taiwan, and in one of them, I'm sure you read about it, there was a very big scroll, and in its history it was cut into two pieces. So one piece is in mainland, one piece is in Taiwan. So as one of these exchanges, this piece was lent to Taiwan. So for the first time, I think for 700 years, it was put together. So this was a very wonderful exhibition, and many, many people came. But I think you are quite correct.
Yes.
Is the original inventory still available, and have the two museums compared what they have versus the inventory?
I'm sorry, I can't answer. I would say the original entry does exist, because I say since 1925 there's not been damage of the Palace Museum in Beijing. The Japanese didn't take things, so I think yes, the inventory should still exist. But I think for political reason, it's quite difficult to have such a conversation. You know, because we then get to the question of who owns what and to whom does it belong. So I think for the moment it would be too difficult to have this dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, for the wonderful presentation. And my question is there main differences which you can point out between the two museums? And if you were to recommend one, like the one that people should go first, which one would it be?
It's a sensitive question. If you recommend that the Taipei one is what
I
you
cannot
prefer,
go anymore to mainland.
then you may be inciting what, I don't
Separatism,
know.
yes.
The Taiwan independence, or hinting that
I answer it this way.
the Beijing one is the Beijing version
I
is a
cannot go
little
to
bit
Taiwan.
second rate.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'll leave it to you.
So I answer it this way. The Taipei Museum is only museum. It was built specifically to display the treasures from the mainland. So it is a very modern, up-to-date, well-designed museum, very nice layout, lighting, air conditioning, very elegant staff, well-mannered, always bowing to you. And, you know, many mainlanders go there now. And some of them, you know. So you know what they did in Taiwan? It was so elegant. These beautiful ladies in their uniforms, they just have hold up a sign saying, please be quiet. Qing and Jing. So they don't tell them, they just... So the Taipei is a very beautiful museum experience. But when we visit the Gugong in Beijing, I feel quite differently. It's more like the history. I think of this place where so many emperors lived, and the history in these palaces, you cannot imagine. The murders, the executions, the plotting, the marriages, the concubines, the wars, that all happen here. So when I go there, this is what I'm thinking about.
True.
Because it was not designed as a museum, it was designed as a palace. And there's no building in the world like the Palace Museum of Beijing.
You see different things.
So I think both are worth visiting. But I dare not say which is better than the other.
If you want to see the heart, go to Taipei. If you want to see the body, go to Beijing. Yes.
Sorry, can I just say one thing more? I interviewed the director of Taipei Museum, and I did a full kowtow on the floor. I put my forehead on the carpet, and I said, please, could you sell my little book in your shop? Because they have 5.4 million visitors a year, and it's just next to the main door. So if we have 1% of those visitors buying the book, I can retire, and my wife will be happy with me for the first time. So after many emails and
Will they do
comings
it?
and going,
Will they do it?
no. But then Tsai Ing-wen won the election, and the museum director stepped down, and a new director was appointed. So I rushed back and did a full kowtow, and I cursed the Kuomintang, and I said this wonderful new government, open-minded and open to the world, not bound by all these
Democratic.
Chinese
Democratic, yes.
democratic restrictions. You can change the errors of the former director,
Yes.
and
They will open the door for you. Yes.
so I got exactly the same email with exactly the same regulations as to why it was not possible. So this is very unfortunate. So I remain criticized by my wife every day for earning so little money.
But with Tsai
Sorry.
Ing-wen in power, next time you go there with a Japanese
Japanese
official.
occupation, then we have chance. Yes,
Yes,
maybe we
okay.
have chance.
Okay, I want to know more about yourself and why do you write this book? Why are you so interested in the history of these two palace museum? And well, I suppose your books was published in Hong Kong, right? And well, compared to people from Beijing or from mainland and from Taiwan, do you think Hong Kong people are interested in the history of palace museum?
Well, I would say that when Hong Kong people go to Taiwan or Beijing, this is the first place they visit. So I think in Hong Kong, thousands, tens of thousands of people have been to both. But Hong Kong people are very busy. They only have a short holiday time. They rush back, and they must start buying properties and selling stocks and shares. So they don't have the time or opportunity to research. So I thought for many Hong Kong people it would be interesting to have the history laid out for them. And I just met two young men here, and they have not been to either museum. So I said, well, now you don't need to go, because with my book, both are covered. So I think in February we visited the Taipei Book Fair, and it was opened by President Ma, and he was going to leave office very soon. He was in a very relaxed mode. So I asked one of the staff of the Culture Ministry if we could have a photograph. So she was very smart. She took me to this place in the fair site with a very narrow space. There was no room for his bodyguards. So President Ma comes down this very narrow space, and there was no bodyguards. So I was able to reach forward and give him a copy of the book, and we do a selfie, with the book. And President Ma is very polite and nice. And so we did also a selfie with the culture minister, and the office of the ROC government here bought 40 copies of the book, for which I'm extremely grateful. But I have to say that among other Taiwan people, I didn't get such a warm response. And I think the reason is if you are in Taiwan, you grew up in Taiwan, you will visit this museum, you will hear about this from your teachers, from your parents. So for them, I think the book is not so interesting. So I think we should say it is more for the people of Hong Kong,
Mainland.
Macau, mainland, and of course, Laowai, because the foreigners, they of course don't know this story. So, but with the foreigners, it's going to be harder work because you have to tell them what is Palace Museum, what is the Taipei Palace Museum, and that's going to be hard work. So I must tell you, in 2 weeks in London, we have an event, and I should do this presentation, and I'm inviting everyone I've ever met, all my family members, people I was at school with, everyone, to start our sales drive in the West. Yes. So if you have any relatives in London, please ask them to come.
because I went to an exhibition in Toronto a couple of years ago, sponsored by Robert Holton Foundation, and he had the honor of having the Gugong, the Forbidden Palace Museum in Taipei, granted him a loan of a certain amount of items to be displayed or in the museum in Toronto. And he told me there were extremely complicated paperwork to do, mostly legal, because the Taiwanese government was or is extremely worried that once these items leave the territory of Taiwan and are on display in a third country like Canada or Germany, which have a very special friendship kind of relationship with Beijing, the Chinese embassy in Berlin or in Ottawa could just grab the phone and call the foreign minister of that country and say, hey, these items belong to China, and your government recognizes only one China, which is us. And if they get the solicitor and then file a court case, it will take months and years while these items have to be frozen there until the court makes a ruling. So they always have to make it very clear to the host government that each single item of treasure has to be guaranteed by you personally. There's no interference, no phone calls from the Chinese embassy, no court case, no solicitors, harassing phone calls, and just make sure every damn item will travel back to Taipei. And that kind of request did make the Canadian or the German government officials hesitate a bit. So, eventually they were all granted to display there because Ma Ying-jeou was the president. But I'm not sure when that lady is in power, it would be as smooth as it has been before.
But one more thing we must say is, as you know, Taiwan is very isolated in the world now. President Tsai can only visit very few countries. The mainland government will try to block her.
Yes.
If she wants even to stop over, even to get out of the plane in the USA or Canada, they will try to stop it. However, the pieces from museum do not suffer from these obstacles. So actually for the, I should say, ROC government, these pieces are extremely important because how can they express themselves in especially major countries, Germany, France, United States, Canada, Japan? No one from the government can go, nobody from the civil servant can go, but the pieces from the museum can go, the director of the museum can go. So they have had some very successful exhibitions in these countries, even after Beijing recognized the governments of these countries. So actually, these pieces have a great diplomatic and symbolic significance, which does not exist for art pieces in any other country. So I think President Chiang Kai-shek was very smart to take them.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Neill. You did mention that when Chiang Kai-shek moved the good stuff to Taiwan, it sort of lands him a sort of, including the seal of the emperor, it lands him a bit of, shall we say, legitimacy, that he was a true bearer of the China. Now, as and when Taiwan formally turned itself into, say, Republic of Taiwan or People's Republic of Taiwan, I don't know. Do you think that there is really a case for Taiwan to still sort of keep those treasures as, it formally severed ties with China? It would no longer be China, so to speak. Thank you.
Well, if you ask this question to director of the British Museum, how will he answer? Because if you remove from British Museum the items and hand them back to their original place, it become an empty hall, and no one will go there anymore. So I think all the museum directors have to have very good arguments against this. So when he was visiting Shanghai, I asked him, I said, your museum is full of items from China, from Egypt, from India. When are you going to give them back? And he's a very smart guy, you know, very sophisticated. He said, well, we are holding them for humanity. You know, we are like a warehouse, storehouse for mankind.
Yes,
Yes, McGregor, he's a very, very smart guy.
very smart.
So I think, I mean, I didn't ask this question to the director because it's too sensitive. I mean, she is represent the Kuomintang government, so I think it's not proper for me to ask this question. But I think they would give the same answer. That
Yes.
the pieces have moved to Taiwan. They have been there since 1949. They are now part of the Taiwan history and the culture and identity of Taiwan. So even Taiwan is independent. They should remain there.
It's a good answer. We live in a global village without borders.
And we welcome our friends from the mainland to come.
Yes. The
And indeed now they are the largest group of visitors. About 40% of the visitors now are from mainland. So, you know, that this is what McGregor, his answer was the same. Our museum is open to everyone.
Mr. Tsao, talking about the private exhibition of Palace Museum's loan from Taipei to Toronto by Mr. Eric Houghton, don't you think he's abused his privilege because of his family's connection with Taiwan and his own Eurasian status as a special as his family's connection in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and with Kuomintang. Thank you.
I would say he took good advantage of his privilege and his past relationship with the Chiang Kai-shek family, so that these items could be loaned out to be able to be appreciated by other peoples like the Canadians. I wouldn't use the word abuse because I don't think Robert Houghton or Robert Houghton himself could have privately grabbed one item like what I was dreaming to do and squeeze into his own pocket and then put them on sale with Sotheby after a few years' time. So I would consider that act, you know, with a bit of a prejudice as an act of universal generosity and fraternity. Right. Yes? Okay. 多謝晒。